KWFM, South Tucson.
The views of this program are not necessarily those of KWFM, its management, or its sponsors. The host is solely responsible for the content.
On a mission given to me by Woody Shaw, Sunship, Dizzy, and Billy Higgins, dedicated to pursuing a piece of our cultural heritage through interviews with my jazz heroes, this is The Jake Feinberg Show. Welcome, everybody, inside the studios of KWFM 1330 The Star. This is The Jake Feinberg Show, and we're happy to have all of you along with us today. My guest today has one of the simplest names in music history. However, once you peel back the layers, you find a compelling and diverse musical career. He was musically inclined from a young age, growing up in Hawaii and going from piano to guitar and eventually the drums. He was part of a generation of musicians who were heavily influenced from first-generation blues players like Muddy Waters, Fred McDowell, B.B. King, and John Lee Hooker. They had opportunities to see these musicians live, how they swung and how they carried themselves. They had opportunities to hear them on far-reaching spectrum of AM radio. It got into their blood, and they were hooked for life. Shortly after his professional career started, my guest found his way to the Bay Area, and like so many of my previous guests, wound up entangled in this melting pot of music, back when Marin County was full of wilderness and the anonymous artists of America. Back when Michael Bloomfield lived next door to John Kahn, and the heliport was used as a practice facility for these cats. The late 60s and early 70s were extremely dysfunctional for our country in so many ways. But one thing that made sense was the spontaneity and on-the-spot improvisation of the music. By this point, blues had taken on new forms in psychedelic rock, both instrumental and vocals. Jazz and rhythm and blues had taken on new freer form approaches, and it provided a launching pad for my guest to form the hard-driving East Bay roots band called Southern Comfort, with Ron Stallings and John Wilmoth among them. During this time, my guest met Michael Bloomfield and wound up doing extensive amount of work with Michael as a drummer and singer in his hard-driving, pulsating, electric bands. Other engagements followed, like Brewer and Shipley, Alice Stewart, Nick Gravenitis, Otis Rush, and Harvey Mandel. However, as the decades continued, my guest fell back from music because of a changing industry and friends who fell victim to dependency and death. Still, as we sit here in 2012, those days still resonate for him with the release of his latest CD, Michael and Me, which is a tribute to Bloomfield and the music he made with Michael. Time to take a drive with Bob Jones. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hi, Jake.
It's nice to talk to you.
Oh, yeah, nice to talk to you. I've been enjoying your interviews with other people I know.
You know, it's to me, this is stuff that is so compelling because you can't replicate it. The quality of the people and the music that came from you guys, the soul, is so evident and is so lacking in today's musical world. So it really, I mean, it's an honor to have you on the program. And you have a radio show of your own. Is that right?
Yeah, I do. Every Wednesday here at a station that is membership funded. It's a what do you call that?
Membership support.
Nonprofit.
Yeah,
it's a nonprofit. And it's on every Wednesday, Hawaiian time, 2 to 5 o'clock. And it's Manao Radio. It's MANAORADIO, ManaoRadio.com, if anyone ever wants to listen to it. But I play the music I love, Nobody tells me what to play. And that, as you can tell from the people I liked and played with, that's a pretty eclectic mix.
It's a phenomenal mix. It's eclectic as well, but I was hoping at some point to get the nod to come on and be a guest on your program.
Oh, I'd love to do that.
That would be fun, Oh,
I'd love to do that. Sure, we'll do that. We'll set that up.
Oh, that sounds beautiful. I wanted to go back. I was reading something where you were one of the first, correct me if I'm wrong, but the We 5 band.
Yeah.
That you were playing the 12-string electric, one of the earliest people to record with that instrument. Is that accurate? And can you fill in that story a little bit?
Sure. I believe in the summer of '64, a movie called Hard Day's Night came out. Mm-hmm. And the title track, Hard Day's Night, George Harrison was using a electric 12. Not sure what he was using, but sure sounds like a Rickenbacker. Yeah. And again, I'm not sure of my facts here, but my guess is, and my impression from other things I've read, is that probably both Jim McGuinn and I were struck by that, especially the ending of Hard Day's Night. It's this arpeggio that fades out. I don't know if you remember the song, but and I was in a band. I'd been hired into a band that was basically a folk trio. And I was an R&B and a rock guy, and I was an electric guitar player. And they took me to Southern California and they lost about half their fan base because they had an electric guitar player on stage with them.
People were still in revel.
Yeah, it was those days,
Right.
But the leader of the band was really, he had vision and foresight, and he could see what was coming, and so. When we recorded You Were On My Mind, which was our hit record, a lot of the stuff we did on stage, about maybe a third of it, a quarter of it, I played 12-string. And I played leads, and I played blues leads, like I pulled. I was pulling stuff
right
on the 12-string, which, is sometimes painful. But anyway, the ending of You Were On My Mind is, and here we go, I bust myself. It's basically, well, let's be nice. Let's call it a homage to the ending of Hard Day's Night.
Wow.
I took the arpeggio that Harrison was doing, I flipped it upside down, made a couple of modifications, and used it as the ending to You Are On My Mind. And so that was recorded early, probably in 1965, and somewhere around the same time as when McGuinn and them were doing Tambourine Man and stuff. So it's likely that probably Harrison was the first electric 12-string player, and me and McGuinn, no telling who was second and third, but we were there within 8 months of hearing the first thing.
The your most recent CD is a tribute. I really like the way you phrase this. This album is a tribute to him, Michael Bloomfield, and the music we made together. And before we get into the yesteryear of just this cacophony of amazing music, I want to send it into the present and take a listen to a track of music on this latest album. Come back and talk about it. That's all right.
Okay.
Started on reefer, I messed with cocaine, fooled with the needle, it tore up my brain. I was just knocking myself out, now I'm knocking myself out, I was knocking myself out, killing me by degree. My mama used to tell me, my daddy wanted me to, son, the way you live it, gonna be the end of you. If you keep knocking yourself out, you keep on knocking yourself out, keep on knocking yourself out, killing you by degrees. Every fool on earth, his day must come. Only thing I want to know, man, did he have fun? Knocking himself out.
Knocking himself out.
He just knocking himself out.
Knocking himself out.
Was he knocking himself out? Was he killing himself by degrees? Let's see if I can knock myself out here.
You know, that tune is entitled "Knocking Myself Out," and we can get into that later. But were you playing lead on that?
Yes.
Okay, that's why I played that tune, because I wanted to talk about the fact is that you were you've been a multi-instrumentalist basically your whole career. I mean,
yes.
From the beginning to the end. So I like how you threaded. You're like, let me see if I can knock myself out. You know?
Yeah. Most of those tracks were cut live in the studio, like that one. There are no overdubs. It's all done at once. It's like we used to record.
That's that is so. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it is overdubbing. That it was happening then, but not to the degree that it does now. I remember talking to the speaking of the Beatles, George Harrison, M.O. Richards, the great percussionist. He was talking about, in Hollywood now, some woman vocalist will start singing, and she'll be like to the producer, "How did I sound?" He's like, "Terrible. Well, come on up, we'll fix it." You know. And there's something. Talk about those sessions. When you were, with Michael, and Snooky Young and John Kahn and when you, I guess, when you were there and you just cut it and burned.
Right. Well, and, there was a certain, I don't know, I guess we call it a male ethic, It's like a sports team. You're expected, when you go on the field, you're expected to leave it all there. You're expected to, show up, play, and when you go in the studio, you're expected to do it right. And the first time. And now, that doesn't always happen, but you do it till you got it a lot of times. Like, You Were On My Mind is actually take 13, and it's a splice of 2 takes because I blew the ending on 13.
Right.
So spliced 14 on the end. But, nobody's without performance anxiety. But, as you go along, you get better, and there's this kind of male ethic to it, where, kind of cowboy up. Come on, man, play. And, we did that, and you got used to it, and you had a lot of fun, and you were just expected to do that. You were expected to perform, on the spot. And one of the things I like about the Live at Bill Graham's Fillmore West album is that it was a live album, and so it has the extra adrenaline that comes from the huge crowd pumping everybody up. I mean, I could barely hold my sticks together. That was my first really big gig on drums,
Wow, that's great.
I've done a lot of big gigs on 12th Street, and we toured with We5, and I was used to huge venues, we opened for the Stones in Pittsburgh and stuff like that, or we were on the bill. We didn't actually open for them, but that was my first big drum gig, so, for that many people, and I was like, I had enough adrenaline for 5 people, you know what I mean?
I don't know. It is, as an audience member, if I was even alive at that time, I would have totally been out of my skull. And before we go there, in We5, you guys were a Bay Area band, and then was that where you were stationed pretty much?
Yeah, they were originally the trio plus a bass player. They were like, Michael Stewart used to call it a Peter Paul and Mounds format.
Right.
it was it was a girl and two guys, two folk guys, on acoustics, and they were from Orange County. And she was from Orange County. They were from Ontario. They were from Southern California. I was from Hawaii, of course. We met at University of San Francisco because we all went there to school. That's how we met.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and I was just, I was going out of my mind. I had no one to play with, and here were these folk guys. I went, oh well.
Now I'll throw the Electric 12 in there too. That's great.
What the heck?
Right.
But yeah, then we went back down to Southern California. We did the folk music circuit, the Golden Bear, Ice House.
No, you said enough. The Golden Bear in Huntington. I've never been there, but that place was like, that was a country western folk. That was legendary. But it's gone now. But what a classic place.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and the Troubadour, a place called A Night's Rest out in Ontario, and we lived down there for a while. But Michael Stewart's brother was John Stewart. He was in the Kingston Trio, so he had an in to management and to recording. And he and John Stewart, because John Stewart replaced Dave Gard in the Kingston Trio, so he had access. He wrote songs for the trio, and he had access to Frank Werber, Trio's manager. And so he started taking us into the studio in L.A., and we cut some tracks, and he was happy, and he wanted to bring us up to San Francisco and record us in his studio at Trident in San Francisco. So he brought us up there, and we went out and all got a big houseboat out there right at the heliport. So we had, right off the heliport, we had this houseboat where we all lived in the houseboat, and we recorded some more, and then we had the hit, and then we toured out of there. So, and then we all got, places to live there, and we're based in San Francisco.
You had some fish tacos. You were fishing and on the boat and jamming as well. The heliport, it's just classic.
Well, actually, jamming at the heliport didn't happen until later because that scene didn't develop. But I thought it was funny, kind of synergy that I had already been there for some time, And then I came back out there, but that's later in the story. But yeah, we were based out of San Francisco. We toured out of San Francisco.
What I was going to say is you said the one of the guys in the band was kind of he saw the future, but I think I want you to put it into your terms. What was coming down the pike, or how did it materialize? Because it is, once we get into it, I'm going to kind of go crazy a little bit. But this is sort of on the precipice. It was this. What could you say it was acoustic to electric instrumentation? Was it the advent of psychedelia? Was it just sort of a social consciousness thing? Where did that come from? I think there's no better person to ask than Bob Jones.
Well, interestingly enough, it's all of those things. Mm-hmm. But I think the social change that post. Baby boom generation being late teens, and they were different. They believed everything they were told about America, and the fact that you could be free and you could go on your own way and you could essentially invent and reinvent yourself.
Right.
And they took it to heart and started doing it, and to their shock, amazement, and dismay, the older generation recoiled violently.
Wow. Okay.
From it. Okay. But we sort of didn't care. And it's a really interesting thing. I love the fact that you talk about this, because this was really going on then. And I'll give you an example. In We5, we cut the track with a drummer named Jerry Granelli, who was Vince Guaraldi's drummer. And he taught at Drum World I think it was called Drum World in San Francisco. And he didn't want to go on the road with us, and we didn't have a drummer in the band, so he got his star student, who was a black kid, like 16 years old, named John Chambers. Mm-hmm. And he said, John will be your road drummer. So John rehearsed the stuff and went on the road with us and became my roommate. And John was a phenomenally gifted drummer, and I mentioned this to you before, but they used to sneak him into the jazz workshop to play with the Coltrane Quartet, when Elvin didn't show up for various chemical and legal reasons.
Right.
and John would hold his. I never saw it, but I was told by people who were really reputable that John completely held his own in that. Garrison and McCoy Tyner and Train.
He was really swinging.
Yeah, and just doing all the stuff that Elvin does, all the polyrhythmic stuff and everything.
Exactly.
That I later came devoted to. So John was enormously talented and gifted and deep in jazz traditions. And then when we went on the road together, we started going out every week. We got our paycheck. We go out and buy records.
Of course.
We carried a KLH around with us, and we just listened to records all the time when we were on the road. And so we started cross-fertilizing. So I play a lot of Delta blues stuff and stuff that John hadn't heard before, and he'd play me a lot of jazz. Now, I had been a jazz listener for a long time. I'd actually come out of a high school thing where in those days, you had stores where you had listening booths, and I would just pick stuff up randomly and listen to it, and I saw this weird cover once and picked it up. It was called Mingus Album, and after that I was a devoted Mingus freak.
I know that album.
Yeah, and so I was a bebop listener all this time while I was doing all this other stuff, and then John just introduced me to more and more bebop guys, and I would play a lot of blues stuff. We would cross-fertilize all this stuff. We were listening to it all the time while we were playing folk rock. You see what I mean?
Right.
That's what's going on. So there's this milieu kind of musical influences, and we sort of don't care. I mean, John became a huge Stones fan. He thought the Stones were geniuses, and this is a guy who is looking up to Train and Ornette and people like this, and he thought in their way he considered the Stones to be the Ornette of rock and roll. He thought that was his concept anyway. So. That's the kind of stuff that was, and that was everything was being cross-influenced. And in fact, when we started We5, we were wearing uniforms, and we were so hit by, all of our friends were like the Byrds and people like, the Lovin' Spoonful and all these people, and we were still wearing uniforms, and we just stopped wearing them on the road. And Herb Alpert, we were on A&M, saw us and snitched to our manager, and there was a big blow up, and then we said to our manager, look, this is coming. That stuff you used to do with the trio, that's history. Mm-hmm. It's over. This is what's coming down the road. You can get on the train or you can lose out. And he had a violent disagreement with us, held up our album for a year, and basically ruined any chances the band had of moving on into that era. Basically broke the band up by not. And later on, he said to several of us, I was wrong about that.
Too little, too late. Yeah, too little, too late. I mean, to me, there's something else to it. There's a component to it about you guys where you were well educated. All of you were very educated. I mean, when I listened to John Kahn talk, there's not a lot of audio, but we were going to play some later, which is great. Or any of these guys, you had a sense where you could see through the first layer of superficiality, the second layer, the third layer, and you could phrase things, and you could point to specific things, and ultimately play your music boldly. But you really there was a sophistication to it. My follow-up question is that this cross pollination, or I forget cross genres kind of things. Yeah. Do you think it was because even like with We5, you had a couple of slicksters from Orange County? Was this primarily happening at a great level in the Bay Area, or were there other urban areas that you could point to that you could say there was something similar happening?
During this time where this was beginning to explode, we were touring with We5. I can safely say it was a Bay Area phenomenon. Mm-hmm. People were coming from all across the country that had the same idea that, the old boundaries are just that, old boundaries. Throw them away, see what you can make that's fresh, as John Wilson said. Make some fresh stuff. And that was happening a lot. I mean, we went to listen to bebop and West Coast jazz guys constantly. We weren't just listening to, you know.
You were seeing Bill Holman and Chet Baker and Shelly May, all those classic cats coming up to the workshop there, you know.
And I was I was a kind of an Noel Jukes addict, frankly. I would go see Noel anywhere I could find him playing.
You know, talk about, before we go on, let's hit on Noel, because, you know, he doesn't like to talk about himself so much, but man, you know, the guy had a profound impact, and you mentioned that you wanted to color in some stuff, so take the time now to do it.
Okay. Frank Werber, who was the We5 manager and who had invested in this club in Sausalito called the Trident, he was a big jazz fan. And he found this group called the Jazz Ensemble. And the Jazz Ensemble was Noel Jukes on tenor, Flip Nunez on piano, Fred Marshall on bass, and Jerry Granelli, the guy that had played on You Were on My Mind.
Exactly.
On drums. Mm-hmm. And I went to see them once at the Trident, and I was completely floored. I'd never heard anything like it because, and I can't say I've ever heard anything like it since, and I wish I could find recordings of this band, because it was like, if you take the feel and the harmonic environment of like Bill Evans,
right,
that kind of West Coast cool, that has a lot of impressionist chords in it and stuff, extended chords, and you combine it with the Dixieland style of improvisation. That is, everyone's improvising all the time, all at once. If you combine those two things, that was what the Jazz Ensemble did. And I was just floored by what they did. I mean, Fred, Jerry, Flip, and Noel were playing melodically and weaving this stuff in between one another. I mean, I was astounded by what big ears they had. They could react to each other in like, certainly it was probably in the real world milliseconds, seemed like nanoseconds to me, and just weave this ball of bebop, you know, forward in time. It was just incredible, and they were the house band at the Trident, and so I became enormously addicted to them, and especially, I like Fred's bass playing a lot. His best bass player I think I've ever heard still, and I loved Noel's playing, and I loved Noel's playing because he had that Lester Young kind of breathy, big vibrato, huge sound. It was just really emotional, you know, super emotional player always. It was never an intellectual exercise. His emotions were always fully engaged in it. So, and then I started going to see him in other, you know, he would play different other weird gigs at the Both and stuff, and I would go find him and watch them there and stuff.
I wish I was privy to the Jazz Ensemble before I interviewed him, because I'm the thing about one of the things I'm curious about is, you know, Flip Nunez, for instance, was if I remember correctly, he was totally he learned by ear. He was not formally trained, and was just, and I think when you talk about the guys had big ears. At least Flip, I mean, was not musically trained, so that might have been one of the things going for him, was that they was totally organic. You know, at least
but you know, if you're sitting there in the Trident listening to them, you can't tell who's got a formal education.
Of course,
because Fred Marshall used to say to me, he said, "Yeah, you know, I got to encourage Flip all the time, because he keeps saying, I don't know what I'm doing, man. I don't know what I'm doing," and Fred would say, "It sounds to me like you know what you're doing." No one else can tell. So just keep doing whatever it is. Apparently, Fred walked into I think he was either a trainer or something, and he told me one time he walked into a boxing gym, and Flip was playing piano. And he listened to him for a while, and he went over to him and invited to come jam with him. That's how he found him.
I'm actually, it's so interesting you brought that up. I'm so convinced when I listen to guys like Woody Shaw and Freddie Hubbard, especially from around that time of, when you had George Foreman and Joe Frazier and and even just locally, their solos bob and weave of those boxers at that time. I mean, there's no doubt there was and so the idea that Flip was there playing, watching these guys bob and weave, that guy, his spirit is very strong, and he was such a beautiful person on top of that. I just, that to me is one of those early, groups that really, sort of, it was the equivalent of land, when they talk about those, you got a new plant at your home and they say, add some fertilizer to really make it healthy. That was like one of those things that really got those roots established there, because the Trident was one of those classic places. And I wanted to ask you, because when I was talking to Grisman, he mentioned Village Music, and he considers Village Music the greatest record store in the history of anywhere, and he's a junkie. And I was wondering if you had gone there to buy a lot of vinyl.
I actually did not spend a lot of time at Village.
Mm-hmm.
John and I bought our vinyl in, I can't remember the shops, in the Fillmore and on the road. We would, that's a day trip for us, is find record stores.
Exactly. John, you're talking about John Chambers.
John Chambers. Sorry,
what happened? What happened to what was made of John Chambers? I mean, I interviewed Joe Chambers, but I'm not really familiar with John.
John went on to play with Elvin Bishop after We5. Well, there was this history where after We5, we flail around for a while. We want to make an R&B band, a rhythm and blues band. And we come up with this band called the Mystic Knights of the Sea. You know where the name comes from?
No, it just sounds fantastic.
The Mystic Knights of the Sea was the lodge that Amos and Andy belonged to.
Oh, okay. I love it.
And Ron Stallings, and this is how Ron comes into the scene. John Chambers and Ron Stallings had gone to Washington High School in San Francisco. That's how they knew each other. And Ron came into the Mystic Knights of the Sea with a trumpet player named Ernie Brasino and a bunch of other guys. And that band didn't really work out. Some people were not, they couldn't step up to the plate. They had performance anxiety. So it kind of broke up, and it resulted in a band that all lived together on Oak Street in a big Victorian flat called the Tits and Ass Rhythm and Blues Band. The TNA Rhythm and Blues Band. And the TNA Rhythm and Blues Band, as far as I can tell now, this must be around 67. I'm not sure of the timing, 67, 68. Consisted of John Chambers, John Kahn, and I'm not sure how Kahn got in there, but I knew John by then, Ron Stallings, and me on guitar.
Oh, my God. Where are the recordings of that?
Oh, God. I wish I had them. I wish I had some.
My gosh.
Before we get off of that, if you ever talk to, or if there's some way we can ask Flip, I mean, not Flip, but
Noel,
if there are any recordings of the jazz ensemble.
Oh, I'll make sure to get on that immediately.
Yeah, I'd sure like to have those.
Oh, no, I think that's worthy stuff. Can you say what the name of the band was again?
It's the Tits and Ass Rhythm and Blues
You
Band.
guys were so, tell me, please, tell me about the first encounter with John Kahn.
I'm just really not sure. The earliest remembrance I can have is he had a house on Potrero Hill. He had a flat with organ from really good B3 player named Charlie Schoening, whose stage name and nom de plume for being a hippie was Chuck Steaks.
Okay.
And,
Chuck Steaks.
Yeah. And I can't remember how we actually met, but John convinced me that what we should do is get together and play scales. And he had the specific way he wanted to do it. He wanted to play, start with just really simple major scales, really slowly. Put on the metronome, super slow, and play the scales. And I played guitar, he played bass, and we would play major scales in every key. And then we went on to other, scales and then other modes, really, really slowly. And that's my first memory of John.
Hold on for a second. What was his background? I mean, he wasn't in school, was he?
No, John was from an L.A. family, Jewish family, pretty good money. But he was adopted.
Oh.
He told me he was from a orphanage in Memphis. So he was an abandoned or given up Jewish child, probably of a single mother, out of Memphis, and they adopted him. And he came and he grew up in Hollywood, and he went to Hollywood High.
Oh boy.
And he and he told me once all he wanted to do in high school was be Scotty LaFaro and a junkie.
he became John Kahn, and then something else. Yeah. Hold on. He had his Jewish ancestry, and then he was adopted by who?
A Jewish family in Hollywood.
Okay, so he was of Jewish blood, and he was also adopted by a Jewish family.
Exactly.
Okay,
so it was one of these deals where probably they were a childless Jewish couple, fairly successful in Hollywood. I'm not exactly sure of his parents, what they did or anything, but the impression I got from John was that they then, in looking for a child to adopt, went to various orphanages that had kids of Jewish descent who were given up for adoption.
Wow.
So that they could raise a Jewish kid, basically.
And then he clearly was somewhat disenchanted with the slickness he gravitated to the Bay Area around that time, pretty much.
Right, but he, his initial obsession was jazz bass playing.
Really?
Oh yes.
So he was a Scotty LaFaro in that
Scotty
vein.
LaFaro freak. Yeah,
he was a freak.
Complete nut for all of that stuff.
Like kind of like Al McKibben, Cal Jader stuff, or is that like?
No, had more of a taste for hard bop and bebop.
Oh wow!
And the West Coast, like the Bill Evans stuff, the same stuff I liked, where it was real, kind of has a lot in common with impressionist classical guys from the turn of the century, Debussy and people like that, and Satie and those people. It's chordally. It's not quite as straight ahead. It's more reflective and more inventive melodically. I don't know. That's the best way that's the closest I could get to my description.
Well, this is so inside. This is just so classic because I would have loved to have sat in there and watched you guys just go through those progressions and those, because John really, the thing about it was, without ever seeing him or meeting him, he seemed to be a kind of a brainchild to so much stuff, whether it was writing, whether it was putting bands together. He really was he was a total, to use a good Jewish word, he was a total mashugana, he was
just implementer, this instigator. He was just, he was an instigator. That's the perfect word. He would be in the room and he would say, you ought to do this. Mm-hmm. And he would smile. And it was completely off the wall. And then later on it would come to pass,
Right. But it was his way of not being confrontational, but actually getting his point across because his taste was really good. So he knew
and he had really interesting, and kind of like I was saying about Michael Stewart, the leader of We5, he had vision. He saw possibilities. He would see people, especially, and say, these people ought to get together. And he would make it his business to make that happen. He would...
exactly. No, I know exactly what you're saying because, you just hit it right on the head. And, I want to... we have a lot more to talk about, but I wanted to go into... I got a little treat for you here. This is a live recording of Bob Jones. Let's see if he can pick out what year and what's going on. It's about a 5-minute clip, okay?
Okay.
She's a big city woman. She don't play no simple game. Lord, she's a big city woman. She don't play no simple game. Yeah, she's gotta hang out on the west side, yeah. Well, she don't even use her real name. different men. Yeah, she'll look out her two windows. Oh yes, and she'll see two different men. She'll take a good card player, yes, and she'll beat him playing his own game. Well, if you think you might surprise her, yeah, she's always got an alibi. Lord, if you think you might surprise her. Oh, yes, she's got a different mind. Yes, and when she tells you a story, she'll look you right straight in your eyes.
We could go on and on. Have you? Can you peg that at all?
You've got me completely mystified.
We got a live show. This, for all I know, it was February 8th, 1969, from the Fillmore West.
Okay, so that's an alternate take. That's the one that didn't. That's as I thought it had to be the Fillmore West Sessions.
This is the Fillmore West Sessions.
Right.
This is a
but that's not the one that's on live at Bill Graham's Fillmore West.
Exactly.
That's an alternate take.
Right.
And that's Gerald Oshita playing a Barry solo, it seems to me.
Well, it's great talking to another radio talk show host like you, because you are reading my mind. I was going to say, was that Flowers or Oshita? And you just answered.
Yeah, it's Oshita, yeah.
And then, just for the record, it's Blues from the West Side?
Blues, there's been a typo on titles, but I think he used to call it Blues from the West Side, but a lot of it's been printed as Blues from a West Side.
This one says Blues on the West Side. And that
on the West Side. Well, close enough.
how talk about, okay, I mean, we're looking at about a 10-piece band here. And, that's a 15-minute opening track. Could you talk a little bit about the leaders, or even as Kahn as an instigator, or Bloomfield, how did they communicate, and how did it come across where everybody could at least play a part? And I'm sure some people eventually kind of got burned out too. But I mean, how did you balance all that power?
I have to say it was pretty much self-balancing.
That's great, because that doesn't happen with my generation. It's just much more temperamental.
Yeah, the keyboard players, first of all, had played with Michael a lot, and they were both fans of Black Baptist Church keyboard playing, where organ and piano work with one another. The organ plays a pad, the piano plays more melodic stuff. So Martin Athlin and Ira Kamen were really used to doing that, and they were both played with Michael a lot, both separately and together. So they knew what to do with Michael already. They had this kind of, they could go on automatic when it came to playing Chicago blues. Do you see what I mean?
Exactly, yeah.
And then Kahn and I were a particularly well-tuned rhythm section. We had listened to all this stuff, and we felt it, and we played it right, and we didn't overplay. And, it's one of the main things that made us different from a lot of the rest of the bands around that time, because we were fans of R&B and blues and jazz, and you don't overplay in that stuff. You play what works for the song, and you take your ego out of it if you can. And then the horn sections kind of, they would do stuff. I would see them do the same kind of stuff that later I saw Ron and John do. And we'd be playing like the first choruses, there'd be no horns, and I'd see one guy lean over to the other guy, like Noel lean over to somebody else, and they'd whisper in each other's ear. And then come around the second chorus, boom, there was a horn part.
Exactly, yeah. Right.
And they were doing a couple of things there, I'm pretty sure, from knowing, investigating it further. One was they would sing each other parts, but also there was this, like most R&B, especially in rhythm and blues, and I'm sure that a lot of guys that played in R&B road bands were jazz players.
Right.
And they had this kind of basket of standard parts they would play for certain kinds of grooves, and they would just call them, and then pull it out of the hat, and it sounded completely rehearsed.
Well, and the thing that I like is that there's no way at that time you're bringing in guys like yourself, like you were in a folk band, but there was electric instruments coming into play. You had guys that were versed in blues, jazz, and you could not pigeonhole that band. I mean, essentially, that particular song was a blues tune, but everybody had chops from all different idioms, which was just, to me, that was just striking, that and that the freedom that Graham allowed a band like that to get up there and play in front of tons of people, and the bill probably included Malo or Santana. It could have. It had Latin. It had blues. It had Miles Davis. There was this unbelievable meshing of all ethnic music, and you put people together of those different races, and as far as I'm concerned, it made it to be a very comfortable, very hip time. People were very comfortable and very open, which is not really very prevalent today in any type of musical form.
Yeah, I don't think you have the same kind of, unfortunately, cross-fertilization. But, hopefully it's cyclic and it'll come around again. But
I wanted to. It's interesting enough. I agree with, and you're one of the guys, like many of them. It is cyclical, but I just wonder if that cycle means there needs to be a complete degradation of all, and then it needs to come back from the roots again. And I don't know what that means exactly, but to me, it's like you can't play a game like you said. This was cowboy up. Go out on the field, lay it on the line. Sometimes I feel now musicians are playing with one hand tied behind their back, maybe two, and there's a lot of different reasons for it. But I did want to play this audio clip here. Speaking, this is we'll listen to it. It's only about a minute long. We'll come back. Okay.
Okay.
I'm not young anymore, really. I remember listening to the FM radio, which I don't get a chance to do much because my car radio's broken, and I was in somebody else's car, and most of the stuff I hear, I can't get real deep into anymore. It seems like pop music has taken kind of a fall as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, me too.
And I heard this punk rock song, I don't know who it was by, and it got me off more than anything I heard on the radio all that whole day I was listening to the radio. It was just like some kind of blues surfing music thing with the guitar blues licks that weren't right, like not quite the right chords and stuff. And I loved it. It was like they were trying to make music.
So that was John. That was John. From 1978.
Oh yeah.
And what I wanted to get at there, he's talking about the radio DJ was talking about new wave music, and I wanted to talk to you about the fact that you guys were not a generation removed from these legends that came before you, Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters and all these, what we consider Coltrane, the Titans. You had an opportunity, and I feel what John was getting at was, he's talking blues chords. They were not playing the right notes. It sounded a little bit different. As we move forward here in society, we get further and further away from those first generation of musicians. And I wonder, how much of an impact and how much of an education you got from those guys, and how hard it is to replicate that. You can't replicate that.
Huh. I'm not certain about that. I mean,
challenge me. Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I do want to say one thing about I think musicians in general, especially American musicians, our styles come from a combining of the European musical tradition and the African tradition. And it's unique in the world, and it created a music that has since become the basis of world music. And I think that creative melting pot has always been going on. I mean, when I go back and read things that what's his name, Bix Beiderbecke, is that how you say his name?
Bix Beiderbecke, yeah.
Bix Beiderbecke,
yeah.
and Louis Armstrong say about listening to one another.
Right.
Even from, they were always trying to get into each other's racial musics and each other's musics. And I think it's the country guys have always borrowed from the R&B and blues guys, and the blues guys vice versa. And it's the nature of American music to do this. And left to their own devices, they will cross-fertilize and listen to, because you get bored playing the same old thing all the time. And you hear something new, even if it's not in your genre, and it sparks it gives you a creative spark. And the parts of it you like, you tend to include in what you do. And I think that's, it's one of the magical things in American music, and I think it's ongoing. I think what happened in that era that I was lucky enough to be part of when I was a young man was that the audiences would allow you to make a living doing it.
Exactly.
The audiences there was this cultural explosion where people were open to all this different stuff and not segmented into these various groups that identified their self-worth and self-identity with a specific music. They would listen to anything all the time. And that allowed us to cross-fertilize, to do things like live at Bill Graham's Fillmore West, to have, to cross-fertilize all these musics, and people would pay money so you could actually do it and still make a living. Now, since, part of the reactionary move of the country to that the conservative forces of America, they were so freaked out by all of this that they took us back in the other direction. And one of the things that happened was we re-stratified into these different cultures that all had their unique musical identity. But I'm married to a woman from Finland, and I went, I've been to Europe several times touring and stuff, and I met her on tour. And in Europe, that's not the case. In Europe, kids that are like 16, she has a granddaughter. She goes to a rap concert, then she goes to like a blues concert. She listens to some R&B. It's not their cultural identity is not wrapped up in a single music. So the audiences support a wider range of music. So it's waiting for American culture, in my view, to reallow its musical creators, who are always trying to do this, to be able to make a living doing it. They just, the one hand tied behind your back, like you're talking about, is an economic handcuff.
Right.
In my view.
Well, I don't think it's an honor to have Bob Jones on the program because you actually lived through this and played and was in this pot, and you're able to articulate the only difference, with your granddaughter or her daughter, or your wife's daughter, is that she's going to different shows like you, and you put them into different idioms. Whereas what was happening was spontaneous creativity. I mean, I interviewed David Williams, the great bass player, last week, and he was playing. We played a track off a Donald Byrd show that he played at in 1973. The opening track was 24 minutes long.
Right.
I mean, it was a lie. The fact is, I mean, if that's me, I would have sat there. I would have had 3 gin and tonics before the first song would have been over. I mean, it was amazing,
right,
that you were able to get up there, have people pay to. I mean, to me, it's brilliant. But that is, I was at a show last night. I don't go out and see a lot of live music in Tucson, but I was invited to see a wonderful flugelhorn player, Dimitri Matheny, and he's doing all sorts of wonderful creative stuff. He's going out into the crowd and he's blaring his flugelhorn in these old, guys' ears just to wake them up. He's doing some spoken word. He was doing some Henry Mancini crime scene stuff. I mean, I really loved it. But I'm looking at the crowd.
Sonny Rollins.
I'm looking at the crowd, and there's a young cat from ASU there who's blowing his head off. He sounds like Joe Farrell. He sounds great. And I'm just looking out there. I'm saying, well, it's one of those things where, people can say it was the drugs, but I also feel there was a social, like you said, it was. I could have gone sober to that stuff and still gotten
absolutely.
Off. You know what I'm trying to say?
And people did. It wasn't all drugs.
No.
But what I'm saying, I absolutely 100% agree with you. Musicians are essentially waiting for the audiences to wake back up.
Mm-hmm.
That's
right. What I saw last night was a dormant. And it's not their ears are so untrained, and it was an older crowd. It was guys that were older than Bob Jones, But there was also younger families there, and their ears are not tuned to it. And I think that listen, all I can say is when you talk very passionately about world music and that it still exists in this country, and after last night I think it's true. I mean, I saw beautiful swinging music. What I saw was a disengaged audience, which is different from the idea that the propensity of places to be able to play this music live has also been cut down drastically in the
right,
States.
Exactly.
And that's a big...
Well, and that's what I'm talking about with an economic handcuff.
Right.
Right, because you can't, you said it exactly. There's nothing more to say about that. That's it. But, that's a direct result of the audiences. The masses, basically. If they won't patronize the clubs, they can't stay in existence. It's all about money.
Right. And, I say this in all seriousness because when I play that clip of John, that was from like 1978, and you said he wanted to be Scott LaFaro and a junkie. What was the intrigue to becoming a junkie? I'm just trying to figure that out because drugs are an experimental thing, and everybody does them, and people that are sort of people can get addicted to it. But why was he aspiring to that?
All our heroes were junkies.
Okay, so then those were who?
Charlie Parker, Coltrane at one time, Thelonious Monk, on and on. We basically said, if all of these dudes are doing this, there must be something to it. We have to at least try it.
Right.
Because
you would see them, but they weren't necessarily in it or doing it during their live before their performances, but they were.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Right.
They were playing on it. Oh, yes.
They were playing on it. And,
oh, yeah.
And it was the way, and so everyone from everybody was pretty smacked up. So you were watching the way they were carrying themselves and how it was just all their soul was coming out of them when they were playing. So it was just completely invigorating.
Yeah. Well, it's just you keep hearing this stuff and you keep thinking, well, what is it with this stuff? There must be something to it if all these guys who I think are complete geniuses are into it. And then basically, it was, the bebop movement was heavily, like it or not, it was fueled by heroin primarily. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that subtracts from the validity or value of the music or artistry one iota. I don't actually care what's, in your bloodstream or what you have to do it. But that's my opinion. But we, if you're coming up in my era and you're watching all this and you're watching all these guys, you go to a Fillmore concert, you see Thelonious Monk on the same bill with Dr. John,
right? And
both of them are, when they're not taking solos, they're nodding. You're going,
That's right.
So
and
you're going to eventually. The pressure is on. If you aspire to be them, so you're trying to do all the things that makes you like them, you're going to eventually come around to trying that. And the unfortunate part about that is that with opiates, people go in and with musicians, see there's already a brain chemistry that contributes to being a good musician, I believe, and one of them is that there's this obsession, and I believe that obsessive kind of personality is also maybe more prone to addiction. So a lot of them go in and they don't ever come out.
That's right. It's you saw quite a few of your comrades, get wrapped up in that. I think the one thing the other thing I wanted to talk about is that we talk about the economic hamstring, but I also see it as these guys were such leaders. There was such a leadership. I feel like there's a leadership vacuum within music. I mean, listen, let's be honest. I mean, you sign with one of the 3 record labels in this country, and you're corporate America. You can't really say what's on your mind or express yourself on stage, or Lord knows not off while you're taking a solo. And in the past, you had this Art Blakey would come into town, and then Woody Shaw and George Cables would go down and make an album, and John Kahn would play. It just seemed that there was the musicians themselves were so independent because there was not a lot of money, and as a result, they were truly allowed to express what they felt, and therefore the music was so rich, and today. It's the electronicization of music, but it's also, we need to make this because we need to sell a certain amount of copies of this, and it's all kind of prepackaged and baked in. And but I look at the leadership of Dizzy Gillespie and Miles and Coltrane and not necessarily by what they said, but how they carried themselves. And it was invigorating. It must have been invigorating for a younger generation to be able to see those guys and then be able to take it one step further in your own music.
Yeah, I think so, but there was a community of players, and we interacted with each other all the time, and we were very excited about what was happening in the various cross fertilizations and musics that was going on and that were going on I just can't overemphasize for instance, both the Fillmore, Bill Graham's clubs, concert venues, and Family Dog, and some other smaller ones. People would come to see those shows without anyone on the bill having a big record. They would just come because it was what they did. They went and they saw experimental music and experimental musicians do experimental things on stage, and it was part of the community's church almost. It's like what Nick Gravenice used to call the Grateful Dead, the psychedelic church. It's a church of the psychedelic.
Right.
it was how they went to church. It was how they felt community and uplifted their spirits and stuff. So the players weren't bound by having to have a huge record. They weren't tied to the big record company. The big record companies were in there trying to figure out how they were bringing so many people in and how to get in on it, how to get in on the money street. But the people were driving the ability for the musicians to play in these experimental venues and bills. Like often they'd be playing their own music, but they, as you said, be playing on a bill with other people with a completely different style. And the thing, again, that was driving that, the thing that was making that able to happen was the audience's willingness to put money down at the door to go in and see that. Do you see what I mean?
I'm going to have to go back and listen to this like 4 times, but I mean, it's you're really honing my thesis, because this is like, it's a tolerance level, and it's an open-mindedness of the audience, because they didn't know who necessarily, obviously,
exactly.
They didn't know who.
A lot of times they had no idea of who was on. I mean, I went to things where I had no idea of who was on the bill. I went to see Ola Tunji at the Fillmore West. I think that's where I went. Yeah, Fillmore, somewhere there.
Right.
And I went, oh my God, that's where Elvin is getting that stuff.
Wow.
Then they completely opened this door to African drumming. And from there, I started listening to African drumming records and realizing that, okay, this is the African thing, this thing that Elvin does on the trap set. He's adapting it to the trap set of putting 3 against 4 all the time. And then I adapted it into my drumming. I said, well, I'm going to do this. And I do some of that on Bill Graham's Fillmore West. You see what I mean? I can trace the flow of that kind of event where I had no idea of what the person was going in, got completely slammed by the concept of the music that I didn't expect, put it together with something else that I knew very well, like Elvin Jones's drumming, and then integrated it into my own style as best I could. Do you see it?
I mean, it really makes a lot of sense. And as a result, it spawned a band that you put together that I'd like to take a listen to right now, and come back and talk about it. Okay?
Okay.
Would you give water to a thirsty man? If he asked you, would you take his hand? Stretched out dying in the burning sand, would you go to him and understand? And if you find yourself all alone, you better get someone and hold on strong. Come and sit down beside me. You don't have to be afraid. No, no, no. Come and sit down beside me, 'cause it's have you, baby. You know I need you. Oh, you are. Don't you know that I want you, baby? You know that I need you. You know that I love you. Oh, yeah. You know that I've got to have you, baby. I've got to have you, honey. I've got to have you, baby. You know that I can't live without you. You know I want you. Oh, you know that I need you, baby.
You know, that's probably I don't think, I just put me right in that room, you know? What do you think of that?
Yeah.
When you hear that now, I mean, does it get, tell me the feelings that come up.
I like it as much as I ever did.
Yeah.
I'm very fond of soul ballads.
Yes.
That was our, we all were. We wrote and sang a lot of soul ballads. In the TNA Rhythm and Blues Band, Ron and I did a lot of Stax material. This band was, we were all devotees of the Stax Volt stable and how they made records and stuff. And in fact, Stax came out and pitched to get us.
Really?
Yeah. Don came out and talked to us at the Matrix at a gig but he wanted to give us $25,000, and that would have to be that money would be used to make the album, and we'd have to come back to Memphis to do it. And in retrospect, I wanted to. I probably should have. I don't know, but
well, that's a really interesting. That is a fascinating story. And when you say in the TNA band, which I need to get analog cassette tapes of that band, but the when you say Stax, were you it was Booker T all the way to Margie Joseph? I mean, how extensive was it all across was it all across the board?
Well, we were devotees. First of all, at that period of my life as a singer, I was apprenticed to Otis Redding, if you will. So I basically studied Otis Redding's records and tracked them exactly. I learned them note for note. So I could do all his arpeggiating and stuff. And then that was, of course, he was a Stax product. He was backed by Booker T and the MGs plus the Memphis Horns on all those records.
Of course.
And then we were the TNA band. We did a lot of Sam and Dave material, and Ron and I could do Stallings and I could do Sam and Dave exactly. I mean, we could. It sounded exactly like them, and so we did all of the Sam and Dave hits and a lot of the out of the way stuff that people don't know. And that's what we did. We did a lot of that material in the TNA band. So a lot of our preparation for this band and our singing, that you hear like in the tail of this and stuff, came from that. Singing harmony. And singing in parallel harmony like Sam and Dave material in the TNA band, which had predated this band. So Sam and Dave was again backed by, that was a Stax product. Arthur Conley, Love Got Me. That's a Stax production. That's a Stax tune. I do it both on Live at Bill Graham's Fillmore West and on this album. I could go on and on. Yeah, and we were big devotees. Our guitar player, Fred, we were big devotees of Booker T and the MGs. In fact, Fred went on later to play with Booker T in the 70s.
Wow.
That's what I meant by it.
And that was just part of the cross-fertilization that we continued. I mean, I'm sure that those guys...
Yeah, we were... And Michael was a huge Stax fan.
Right.
Huge. And so we were all... Michael was tremendously excited about the fact that he found this group of guys who could actually play in the Memphis style, competently, like at a pro level. that he could play with. It just really got him. He really enjoyed it. That's why he helped us get the contract with Columbia.
So just for the record, did you guys, the TNA band or Southern Comfort, did you guys play out in the Bay Area at venues? And if so, where did you play?
Yeah, we played a lot. We played double bills with Tower of Power in Jack London Square. We played all over the Bay Area.
I mean, get me back to that. What was it, about $5 to get in there?
No, it was. I don't even remember, but it was what a gig. That was just because when I first heard them, they had another rhythm section. They didn't have Rocco and
Garibaldi and
Dave, yeah, and then the next time I heard them, we did this double bill, and I went, holy. Oh my God! This is going to go somewhere, because they were tremendously tight horn section, and I'm big. I had trumpet and tenor, but I was my horn section was that was a really good horn section. So, but yeah, we would, and I can't remember exactly. I almost remember there were like 2 stages. It was like the old days. I'm not sure if I'm right about this. I sort of
it's a hazy memory.
Yeah, and we played back. Well, I wonder why. and we would play back and forth. But then we did a lot of stuff both of us played at the Keystone Corner. We played all over the Bay Area and actually all over California. We did a lot of college gigs up and down the coast and in the Central Valley. We never got out of California though, unfortunately.
Can you? It's funny. I have Todd Barkin coming up on my show next week, and I was hoping you could relay the significance of the Keystone Corner, in the sense of that it was a social meeting ground, and then just the idea of, you want to talk. We've been using that same term, cross fertilization. I mean, from Rassan Roland Kirk, Captain Beefheart, Southern Comfort, the Garcia Band. It didn't matter. That place was. Joe Henderson, it was open to everything.
Right.
It epitomized, and when did it open? So when did the Keystone actually open?
I'm not certain of that, but I know...
Well, you don't...
Let me see what the earliest... I have 16-millimeter home film of us going in for rehearsal for the Otis Rush album.
Oh my gosh!
It was produced by Nick, and we're outside the Keystone, hamming it up for his 16-millimeter camera, soundless, and that's right around. That's Ron Stallings is in it, and Fred, the guitar player in Southern Comfort. So that's right around. Nick was the producer. Nick brought. Otis Rush out, and I played both guitar and drums on that.
I think Wilmoth was in that band too.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I was going to say, because that track we played, Kahn was playing piano. Do you think he would have gone back to Memphis with you guys to cut that album, or was he really not officially a member of Southern Comfort?
He was not an official member. Our Achilles heel in Southern Comfort was the bass, and the guy we started out with was. He was good. He was a great player in rehearsal. He was a great player on gigs, but he had performance anxiety that stopped him from being a good studio player. This is often where the breaking off point was with guys. Mm-hmm. I mean, I when I was first in We5, I tussled a bit with this myself. But eventually overcame it. But so then we went on to a guy that was just a natural player, who was Art Stavro. And he was one of these guys like Flip Nunez. He had no idea what he was doing musically, but he played like Rocco. He was just one of those people that comes out of his mother playing bass. And then the third guy we finally had was Carl Severide. And Carl went on to play with me, with Alice Stewart, and tour Europe, and then went on to be like the bass player with Robert Cray for like 20 years. But all that time, I was beating on Kahn to be the bass player, and he had other fish to fry. He wouldn't do it. He would never tell me why. He played a lot of his goal structure very close to his chest. But we wrote a lot together. Right? You know, I remember I told you we practiced and we did a lot. By this time, he was living out in Lagunitas in Marin County, had a girl, or they may have even gotten married. And I would go out there to write, and his writing instrument of choice was the piano.
Right.
And he was, I can't even remember who has, produced by Nick Ravenice and John Kahn. So he was Nick pretty much sat there and read the paper. Nick did and John did a lot of the active production. And we wrote a lot of songs at his house with piano originally, and then we would bring them back to rehearsal at my place. And we'd get Ron in there, and we'd work out vocal melodies and stuff. So, and then we'd take him in the studio, and often he would play piano on the tracks he had, conceived of a lot of the chord changes on piano.
In our remaining moments here with Bob, and we're gonna have to do this again, another chapter here. We've gone through just a portion of it, but you brought it up a couple times, and you've lost some of your best friends to substance abuse, and you talk about this performance anxiety. How much of the substance abuse for Bloomfield, Kahn, had to do with lessening that? Or did it work in conjunction? And was that one way people tried to dissipate that performance anxiety?
Well, that's a funny answer. No and yes. With those two guys, during the whole period I knew John, he was not. He took nothing. He did nothing. I think he smoked once in a while. Mm-hmm. But that was it. He wasn't into.
He smoked cigarettes. He smoked cigarettes.
No.
The other. Yeah. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he wasn't into opiates at all. And if John had a performance anxiety, I never saw it.
No, that guy was just mellow.
And same thing with Bloomfield. I don't think that had anything to do with it. However, I think that substance abuse had a lot to do with performance anxiety had a lot to do with substance use with a lot of other players, just not those particular ones. But yeah, it was a huge part of, yeah.
It did. It was a tragic. I mean, the only thing is, I know that when John became, Jerry Garcia's exclusive bass player. I mean, I interviewed the organist for that band, Melvin Seals, who played with Elvin Bishop actually, and it was Melvin was a man of the church, and they would be in a studio session at Club Front in San Rafael, and they'd play a couple tunes, and then all of a sudden Jerry and John would disappear. He had no idea where they were,
Right.
and so. The thing that's so exciting about interviewing a guy like Bob Jones, more than anything else, is that, totally indirectly, you have opened me to a whole new a pathway of music. Because for someone like John Kahn, I was always familiar with his bass work with Jerry Garcia Band, but then to go back to even the earliest beginnings of John and to trace it to Bob Jones. It's invigorating to be able to hear all this great music with Ron and John Wilmoth and Noel and you. I feel very blessed about it. And before we get off the line, please tell the story for the record about how you were conned into a musical career.
Oh, well, I was conned into playing drums. I already had a musical career.
You were conned into drum. Thank you. You were conned into playing. So take us through that. Yeah.
Because it goes back to. Luckily, we touched on a little bit the TNA Rhythm and Blues Band, we called them for short. That was living on that flat on Oak Street, and so it was Ron and John Chambers and myself and Kahn, and that band, it didn't have a lot of success, unfortunately, and so. Eventually it broke up, and at this time, this was when John was going out to the heliport. He was jamming with this guy, Charlie Schoening, Chuck Stakes, and some other people. I'm not sure, probably Michael sometimes. I wasn't there when Michael was there. That happened later. But John had heard me fool around on, John Kahn had heard me fool around on John Chambers' drum set. and he said, "Come play drums out at the heliport with us." See how he is?
Mm-hmm. Instigating,
It's
always
him again,
instigating,
see?
always.
Yeah, and so yeah, and I would go, "Come on, man! I'm a guitar player. I can't play drums. I haven't studied anything. You know, my rudiment is a single stroke roll. I mean, you know,
right.
I can't even do a double stroke." He said, "Yeah, but you sound good, man. You play that simple Memphis. You have a fat back feel." And I did have that, but I didn't think that was enough to be a good drummer, and so I kept resisting. Finally, he would not give up about that stuff. So finally, okay, I borrowed the rattiest drums John had. He would let go, and I went out to the heliport and did one of these sessions, and we just had an enormous amount of fun, and I was singing a lot. And it turned out I could sing and play drums, and I could sing all this Otis material and all this Sam and Dave and R&B stuff. So, of course, now they had a singer to do all this music they wanted to do. So then I just kept doing that, and that probably put together by Kahn again turned one of these times. It was not at the heliport. It was at this ranch in Novato where the Anonymous Artists of America lived. Chuck Stakes, Charlie Schoening was playing organ, John was playing bass, I was playing drums. Fred Burton, at that time Fred Olson, who played on Southern Comfort, he was playing guitar, and John had gotten him to those. That's where I met Fred. In fact, see how he's like. He's at the center of putting people together. That So we're up there playing, and this guy. I just finished doing Cigarettes and Coffee. We're doing, and this white kid with this big fro sticks his head around the corner and said, "Man, I thought that was like Otis Redding singing and Al Jackson playing drums." And of course, you can't say anything better to me than that.
That's
at
right.
that time. You know what I mean?
Right, absolutely.
You want to get on my good side, you just said the two right things to me. Because of course these are the people I'm trying to be, right?
Exactly.
And then he disappears, and then he comes back in the room with a Les Paul, and there's an open, and he plugs in and he starts playing, and I'm going, oh my God, who is this guy? And I'm looking over at Fred. Fred's kind of, and he's a good soloist, a good player, but he's like intimidated, and I never saw Fred intimidated. I thought, So when that was all over, we talked a bunch, and I realized I had met Michael Bloomfield, from the Paul Butterfield Blues Band and stuff. And it was that time he started talking about the Fillmore West sessions, and went from there. But then with that, I kind of started taking it seriously that I could play drums and practicing a little more. Never really studied though. I just was all completely a field player, and then I started getting so many more gigs on drums than I was getting on guitar that I just stopped playing guitar.
I mean, it's amazing to me. That's a confounding. Kahn knew exactly what he was doing because he knew there would be an opportunity where Michael would hear that. Michael freaked out, and then there you became his partner, singing and playing drums with him, which is just,
Yeah, he's like this. He's this interesting fulcrum point, isn't he? I mean, it's amazing now that you pointed out. I knew he had that, but I never really put together as much as I have in this interview how often you find him at the center of really seminal things that change everybody's lives, musically. Bob,
listen, I could talk to you for another 3 hours, man, but my engineer, we got to wrap this up, and
right.
With Bill Vitt and George Marsh and Bob Jones and Eddie Marshall and Eddie Moore, and the list, I'm going to leave out a lot of great guys, but it just, the scene, again, you were a guitar player, but then when you finally switched to drums, just the quality of the individuals, the quality of the human beings outweighs the musicianship, which is saying a lot. And I think that the bottom line is that the thing about Kahn at the end of the day was that, yeah, he was at the epicenter of all these amazing things, but it was how he went about it. It was the subtleness, the nuance. It was,
Right.
You didn't see him coming in and trying to be everybody's best friend and playing politics. It was just little subtle things that, if you were perceptive enough, you dug it and you moved on. And to me, that's where true love and creativity comes from. And that was happening all over the place at that time. So Bob Jones and The Drive, it's a phenomenal album. We only got a chance to listen to one track, but it really, I can't recommend it enough. And you're playing guitar on it, and you got a bunch of great guys, local cats. And, Bob, I look forward to, after the new year, doing round 2, because I think we have to, talk a little bit more about Bloomfield and Alice Stewart and this guy Steve Funk, who I think you played with Alice Stewart, possibly on those studio albums.
Steve Funk played a little bit, but then he got out of the band. It was basically became a trio: me, Carl Severide, and Alice. And that's the way we went to Europe and toured for a couple of years. On my website, there's a video of us playing at Fillmore, Winterland, actually. If you
I've seen, and I saw that. That was beautiful. Yeah. Hey, listen, and let's plan to do something with your show in Maui. I would love to do that.
Sure. Okay.
Bob, it was a pleasure, and long live John Kahn and Reverend Ron Stallings and everybody else who is John Chambers still alive?
No.
Well,
died of chemical reasons.
Michael Bloomfield and bless all those guys, Bob, and it was just an honor to talk to you. And keep swinging, and I'm glad you got conned into playing the drums.
Yeah, me too.
All right, brother.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
It's the Jake Feinberg Show, KWFM 1330, The Star.
Now